Hey everyone, welcome back to the Meme Team podcast, where we discuss viral pop culture moments in movies, TV, politics, and music. I'm your host, Sonia Bashez, and this week I'm joined by my friend, Jess DeFerris, author, etymologist, TikTok creator, and editor-at-large at Reagan and PR Daily. Welcome, Jess.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm delighted to be here. This is going to be so much fun.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's get started. I want to talk about Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce getting married. Okay,
Let's
but
do it.
really, I want to talk about it more from like the brand side of things and like what I kind of saw as the positive and negatives of how brands tried to participate and who came out on top, who came out
Um,
not looking so good.
Imagine having your wedding be a brand moment
I know,
that
I
people
know.
are
And
trying
that,
to glom onto. Oh my God.
yeah. I mean, but that's her life now, right?
Mhm.
It was to be expected. I mean, NBC News called it the American Royal Wedding, which is super cringe. There was a guest list of under 1,000 people, movie stars, models, artists of all kinds were there.
Practically
Um,
a destination micro wedding
I know,
at
I
Madison
know.
Square Garden.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, one of those things was that, it was at Madison Square Garden and then it flashed those purple just and T married, which I thought was kind of cringe because it did kind of remind me of AT&T. And
Right?
AT&T kind of acknowledged that by, posting about it. Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce didn't have a wedding. They executed a brand activation with a ceremony attached. And that's kind of what happened. I feel like we've been getting all these like small snippets of people who have attended and the brands that like were there or that were used. So the Knot put a branded moving truck outside of MSG, which to me felt, it was a perfect fit, right? It's the business alignment is there. You're not really forcing it. But then you had American Eagle Outfitters, whose stock had jumped because of the Kelsey collab, make an announcement and we're waiting for that trigger. But then you had a bunch of brands that basically launched AI generated brand memes reacting to it. The New York Times ran a piece calling them all out. And I think it was both like, okay, you're trying to glom on to this event, but then also you're using AI generated content, which means that you don't really care about it enough to create a actual, content piece around it. And I think that's where it's like, obviously we have all these moments of, monoculture. We're talking about that, right? With like FIFA, the World Cup, where like brands are jumping in and it seems like they're genuinely want to be a part of it, right? We kind of knew what the date was going to be. So it's like you could have prepared something in advance, but instead it seemed like everybody was just jumping on to like come out with something instead of putting actual thought behind it. And I think like a big thing that I kind of want to talk about is like as a brand, when you are trying to piggyback on things, I would like brands to think about these things a little bit more than just creating, a half-assed, brand post about it. And it's funny because we've seen previously that for her engagement and for her albums, how brands have reacted to that. And they've done a much better job doing that than they have for the wedding. So, in terms of, what brands do to participate in like, monoculture events, would love to hear your thoughts.
I mean, she and this relationship are a brand as
You're
far
right.
as culture goes. It makes perfect sense to kind of create a moment where brands can jump in and engage. But like you said, I think it makes way more sense to have planned for something. It's not like we didn't know this was coming. We've been
Right.
talking about this for a long time.
I mean, they've been
So,
engaged for like 2 years now, I think.
right. I mean, it seems like brands put more thought into annual events like the Super Bowl
Mhm.
than they did into this, especially if they're generating like crappy AI memes.
Mhm, right.
And
Yeah,
why did we all do that?
I know, I know.
Mhm.
I think another thing too, which has been an interesting thing, I think from a PR standpoint, is this whole idea of like the tackiness or like all the drama of like who she invited, who she didn't invite, very prominently being like the whole Blake Lively relationship. Maybe brands felt a bit of hesitation because of all like, the negative, drama around the wedding narrative, right? The fact that, there is a lot of people talking about how tacky it is based on, the type of stuff that was happening at the wedding itself, like the buffet line and like the flowers that were caught by like, the friend. I saw today that there was like a raffle for like a Chanel bag. For me as like a brand that like if I want to be known as like luxury and care about craft and like, how things are made, I don't know that I would want to necessarily be involved with, you know, tackiness, being, mentioned along the same lines with my name. Um, I will say that the one brand that I did see that, and it isn't even that like they are putting themselves out there as like we were, we participated, is Christian Dior, because like that's who designed both the outfits for Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. But I actually think that them not announcing it is working better for them than for them to like announce it. And it's very funny because we also recently had the wedding of Dua Lipa, who was pretty open about like, having photos come out in Vogue, having photos of like her dress, not just photos, but like there was like videos showing what her wedding dress looked like. And it was like behind the scenes kind of look. So it allowed the brand itself to come out and like say, like, yes, we designed her dress and this is what it looks like. And, it was a very like
Oh,
well
yeah.
produced video. And we haven't seen that from Christian Dior yet. And I'm wondering if that is going to come out
Mhm.
or not, because it's like you are being associated with them.
Mhm.
You think you would want to get, something out of it.
And that's also one that it doesn't feel tacky. It doesn't
Right.
make it doesn't it fits the brand, it's relevant to the audience, it makes sense for them to show up in that way, and they actually have something to say, whereas a lot of these AI generated memes and whatnot just didn't have anything to say, so they went with the lowest common denominator. Like it makes perfect sense for like Sephora and things like that to jump in. It makes sense for Dior to jump in, but there were plenty that had basically no business being there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that's also part of this other topic where it's like there's two fandoms kind of coming together. It's like Taylor Swift and her fandom, and then you have Travis Kelce and like football.
Mhm.
So it's like brands are kind of caught between, do we focus on just one or do we focus on them together? And I think the fact that they're kind of trying to focus on them together makes it so you're not really focusing on either one, right? Or it's like
Mhm.
it's much easier to, create content for a Swiftie knowing that like, they're going to appreciate it than like, trying to have both of them, come together as like one. And I think that's where it's like brands, going forward, have to think about if you do want to participate in the whole like Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift spectacle and brand, are you going to do it as like one whole thing or just as that have been as like the separate, entities? I think that's something that brands need to decide, you know, um, in order to like, know who you're targeting and speak to that audience directly.
I mean, it certainly makes more sense for the Swiftie base to be following a wedding narrative, but, you know, there's room for both.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And then yeah, I think the other thing too is it's one of the few moments that it seemed that Taylor Swift as like a brand didn't really figure out how she wanted it to come out. I admire her as like a marketing and like business person, like how she has managed to like,
Oh, sure.
take her brand and like who she is and all that, create community around it, really be close to like her fans who like adore her and will follow her anywhere. I saw this that TBPN boys were talking about this as like she's a master in like creating windows around her experiences, right? So she has like the
Yeah.
very big, more expensive eras concert. She'll do the documentary and have that be come out in like theaters. So you have to pay to go to like the theater to watch it, and then eventually it'll trickle down to the streaming platforms that most people already have. So this idea, it's like knowing the right time and the right product to put in front of your fans. She kind of gets digs for it here and there for like doing multiple album covers and stuff. So it is interesting to kind of have her push the boundaries of how she's selling herself as a business.
Yeah.
And this felt like it it wasn't fully as controlled as she would have liked it to be.
I agree, and I understand why that would be difficult too. If you're, I mean, her if her brand is telling heartfelt stories about romance and relationships through her music, then creating a brand feeding frenzy out of your wedding is
Mhm.
a tough balance to strike, right? And she's not going to be able to keep that kind of activity away from the wedding unless she makes it absolutely invisible to the public.
Yeah. I think that was, like, one of the things, right, was, like, you could go the, Zendaya and Tom Holland route of it being completely hidden away from everybody, and then you just kind of announce, "Yeah, we're married," like, as you're doing, like,
Right.
movie premieres, or go, like, the Dua Lipa round where it's, like, you know where it is, people can get photos and can get some access, and she kind of went for something in between, and it didn't really work one way or the other. I think that's kind of where, as, like, a brand her brand to, like, think about, is this the way that she wanted her wedding to come out or to, like, be talked about?
Absolutely.
Okay, so a couple lessons for me. Speed is not enough. Creating AI generated content in order to participate in a moment of monoculture ends up being far more embarrassing and tacky than if you had
Mhm.
planned this in advance. A lot of these things, like, we have enough knowledge to kind of create something around. So if you know that you want to participate in this at some point, then it's like thinking about it. Before it actually happens, is the smart thing to do. I think about it as in, like, the way that in journalism we have obituaries already written up for people that we know are aging or are getting close, so that they kind of have it ready to go, as opposed to trying to write an obituary at the last minute once the person has already passed, right? And these are things that, like, we know are happening, and much like you said, right? It's like we know the Super Bowl is coming. We know that the Olympics are coming. We know that, the World Cup is coming.
Mhm.
These are things that we could plan in advance. And we had heard, rumblings that the wedding was going to be on July 3rd. We might not have thought it was actually real, but it was still, like, enough time to kind of create an idea or create a piece of content if that was what you thought your brand wanted to participate in. Another lesson is to fandom problem, or the fact that, if you're going to go after or try to go after both of the audiences that don't really have much overlap, you're really catering to neither audience, because then neither audience kind of feels as if you're talking to them in a way that they'll find relatable or appealing. Um,
Mhm.
and
The most
then
successful ones were absolutely pertinent to wedding brands, right?
Right.
Mhm.
Right, and it's funny because it's like, if you remember for, like, her engagement, a lot of brands just all they did was, like, share a picture of her and, like, a congratulations, right? And that
Yeah.
was enough, and I feel for
Mhm.
this one, they either wanted to do too much or not enough, and I
Mhm.
ended up kind of being, like, in the middle of neither. And then, specifically here, being able to jump in on an audience that is to be truly gonna be engaged, like the Swifties, would have been better than trying to, go after both of them.
I would say this is just another classic example of, showing up with credibility. The
Mhm,
Knot did a great job, to your point, on this. They absolutely have every right to be there. Any makeup brands, beauty brands, that makes sense. AT&T, to your point, they
mhm,
leaned into the moment in the right way. Everybody else maybe should have just kept it simple.
mhm. Totally agree.
All right, let's see. One of the biggest stories of the World Cup was FIFA's decision to suspend a one match ban for US striker Folarin Balogun. I hope I said that right. Ahead of the United States round of 16 match against Belgium. And he had received a straight red card during the US victory over Bosnia and Herzegovina, which ordinarily carries an automatic suspension for the following match. And then Donald Trump publicly acknowledged that he had personally contacted the FIFA president asking FIFA to review the decision because he believed the red card had been unjust. And then FIFA's disciplinary committee announced that under Article 27 of their disciplinary code, it would suspend the automatic one match suspension for a period of 1 year, making him able to play in the game against Belgium. This is kind of a key point here. They didn't overturn the red card itself, but suspended the punishment. But it immediately generated a bunch of criticism that went well beyond the US. The Belgian Football Federation formally challenged the eligibility before kickoff. It was a whole big thing. And their public statement was that their decision had crossed a line, and it's just been total chaos. And I don't know that that's recoverable, because even if there were a full investigation and we determined that the Donald Trump's phone call had not been the basis for overturning the decision, that's still in the zeitgeist. Like, we can't undo
Mhm.
that. The thing that I find interesting is that FIFA and everyone else are almost talking about different stories. FIFA's public position has focused almost entirely on process, and then everyone outside of FIFA is talking about political influence and fairness and precedent and institutional independence and general impropriety. And so whether it actually changed the outcome or not may be impossible to prove, but that's kind of beside the point, because the
Mhm.
narrative had already taken off, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Part of it is also the American team then had to go into it um, with a different mindset of like, oh,
Yeah.
you're cheating. You had the rules changed in your favor.
And then
Um,
lost anyway.
And then lost anyway. Well, yes, but then also maybe that's what led to the loss, right? Where it's like
Hmm.
if you're going into it thinking that everybody hates you because, you got an unfair advantage and you didn't have to play by the rules. The other thing to like think about here is like this isn't the first time that FIFA has done a similar thing, right? Like they got rid of Cristiano Ronaldo's like red card so he could participate in the World Cup. You could argue that like, Messi's challenge should have also been a red card. Superstars are treated differently because,
Hmm.
there's just like different rules. And I think if you're able to talk about it in that way of like, yes, we know it's unfair, but there are also like special rules for the superstars like Cristiano Ronaldo and Messi. And Balogun falls under this, not for himself necessarily, but because USA is like a host country trying to like get into that narrative of like, um, we're trying to make it seem as legit as possible. So it just ends up, putting a whole bunch of like controversy on everybody. So the stink gets on everybody, right?
Yeah, the reputational damage is already done, and that rubs off on sponsors and
Yeah.
everything else that goes with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Professional sports leagues, to your point about the wedding as well, they're operating like consumer brands, that
Yeah.
like every governance decision now gets analyzed through social media, through sponsor expectations, political reactions, international press, and fan communities. And it's just a different environment now. And FIFA is, as you've pointed out, no stranger to these controversies, and they end up becoming sponsor issues. Like their relationships with Visa and Coca-Cola and Adidas have become public voices during some of their corruption scandals, and sponsors don't want to become part of their governance controversies, but they also invest enormous sums in the credibility of the tournament.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't think that it'll affect much in the future. Just because, FIFA has kind of done this before. They've been in many controversies. How they're picking countries to be like, host countries, it has always had controversy, right? With Russia, with Qatar. They had to change, remember, the Qatar
Hmm.
tournament to be during the winter instead of the summer when all tournaments usually happen because you can't be playing in 120-degree weather in the middle of a desert, right? And so
Yeah.
there was that whole controversy about like doing it purely because you wanted to host it in Qatar and knowing that there was so much money trading hands that that was the reason. So the fact that they've done this with other players and then now with America, I mean, you can even bring up the fact that they have allowed hydration breaks because,
Yeah.
American
Hmm.
companies and, the host, Fox, wanted to have commercial breaks in between. So they created this quarter system basically for America, right? And now the question is, will that continue going forward or will it not, for this next one that's going to be hosted in Spain, Portugal, and Morocco, right? And then the other one that's like coming up, that I've heard like, people talk about is what's going to happen with 2038 because FIFA has done this like rigmarole basically of how they're choosing host countries
Mhm.
to basically make it so that America is the only the only country that's possible to host it based on like their own rules of like similar regions not being able to host it one after the other, right?
Mhm.
So it's pretty much certain that America is gonna host in 2038 again, which is great for us, but may also bring up these allegations of like how fair the system really is, um, and whether the rules are meant to be, sidestepped for, particular situations that, call for it. I mean, I was of the mind that like, it benefits us, so just take it, like, don't feel bad about it because like it had nothing to do with Balogun, had nothing to do with like the US men's national team. They weren't the ones that were out there like, putting that forward. Even if you believe that Trump was involved, FIFA wanted to own it as if they decided to do it all by themselves. If it was a thing where like the players felt like badly that like it shouldn't have been a thing that was given to them, and then that affected their performance in the game, like that's the thing that like annoys me the most because it's like it had
Yeah.
nothing to do with you guys. I kind of compared it to Maradona's Hand of God, right? Where it's like it happened, it benefited them, you kind of take it, you take ownership and then move on from it. It's still
Mhm.
controversial, obviously. Like this thing, I think it'll be controversial forever, but it's
Mhm.
like it's not really a thing you can apologize for,
Right.
because it
It's
had
a
nothing
it's
to
an issue.
do
It's
do
an
with
issue
us.
for FIFA as a brand, not the US
Exactly.
sports team, though it in the minds of people watching it, it kind of it continues to color the United States reputation as a
Mhm.
whole.
But is that not our reputation anyway?
Yeah, right.
So yeah.
So, FIFA has this consistent communication style. Looking back over the past decade, what struck me weren't these controversies themselves. It's how similar FIFA's responses have been.
Mhm.
Whether the issue is corruption or Qatar or Balogun, then FIFA almost always defaults to this institutional language. It talks about procedures and governance and committees and regulations and disciplinary codes. And that's understandable. Governing bodies govern the rules,
Mhm.
but the public discussion almost always centers on fairness and legitimacy and politics and values and trust. And those are reputational challenges that they have yet to resolve. The story also moved categories almost instantaneously. Like it for about an hour, it looked like a refereeing story, but then it became a governance story, and now it's a
Mhm.
comms story and a reputational story. And it's a useful reminder that organizations don't always get to decide what kind of crisis they're managing, for
Mhm.
example. And then the public is the one that decides that. And then the biggest communication challenges may be precedent. This would probably be the question that I'd be asking if I were covering FIFA. If this Article 27 allows this outcome, under what circumstances should people expect it to be used? Is this extraordinary, or rare, routine? Will it happen again? And whenever an organization makes an exception, audiences immediately want to know whether they're looking at a new precedent or a unique case. And so do all of the brands that come with it, right? So I think that's where FIFA still has some explaining to do.
Yeah, I doubt that they will. I think this is just a one and done and a card that they now have in their pocket to pull out whenever it benefits them. One of the lessons for me is that once you confirm the intervention, issuing an independent statement doesn't repair the contradiction, right?
Right.
It creates a new one, and that's basically what we saw here. The sequence matters as much as the words. I
Mhm.
think one of the things that they should have realized is that whether or not Trump was involved or was informed, he was going to take credit for it. He has done this across all issues that he has, been involved with. So if they were gonna involve him, or if they knew if that call was real, they should have counted on it. And they should have
Mhm.
then, worked their statement around that, knowing that he was gonna, say this because of course he is. And I think that was one of the problems with me of like how they reacted to this is not taking that into consideration because then they added a whole bunch more like fuel to the fire of like it becoming more a political thing versus a like process thing for the game itself. Um,
Mhm.
And that would have cleared things up both for them, but then also for the team, and then, for Trump himself. So that's something that it's like if you're going to have, a situation and you want to try to control it as much as possible, you have to think about all the factors that may affect how people feel about it, regardless of what you think you want to happen. And that's kind of what happened here. And then another lesson is that precedent is product. The moment that FIFA opened the review, every other red card appeal was going to be inevitable. So
Hmm.
these decisions aren't obviously going to be able to scale in isolation. So, much to what you were saying, deciding how that's going to be a thing going forward is a thing. Even if it means coming out and saying, this is a one-off thing, we're never doing it again because of everything that of everything that came from it, from then, instead of just allowing this like gray area to continue existing for the duration of this World Cup, but then also World Cups in the future.
It's all more algae for the reflecting pool.
I know, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's the thing too. Like, I think this is the first time, especially because it is taking place in America, that I think the conversation revolved around it a lot more, right? I
Oh,
think they
certainly.
were used to the way that things kind of happen in Qatar, where it's like you kind of complain about it, but then it kind of dies off because, like, there isn't that much attention being paid to it because it's, soccer. The American audience just doesn't really listen to it. The fact that it is in America, it involved the American team. It was like a thing that like had never really happened before. Just through all these like elements, made it so that like it took over the conversation. And that's why like it became such a like maelstrom storm for like everybody.
You made me think of the notion. I get the niggling feeling that FIFA has kind of in this World Cup alienated a lot of its European fans because
Mm.
they can't watch the games unless they're willing to watch at 1 a.m. and that that's kind of rough. And
Mhm,
then the I've heard a lot of my British friends, for example, complaining about these water breaks and commercial breaks,
mhm.
and they definitely don't feel as excited as they have about past World Cups.
Yeah, that fits into the narrative of, like, what I'm seeing on Twitter where it's like
Yeah.
the English fans are not happy, but then all the rest of the European teams have been, like, fine, or, like, fans have been fine, right? And that's kind of also showed up in how they're, celebrating in, like, America and everything. So I do think that this helped push other Europeans, like, into, like, more of the negative side of things
Hmm.
because they're like, "Oh, well, now, like, America's getting favoritism, for a sport that they don't even like, for God's sake,
Right.
Um,
Yeah, the
so yeah.
travelers on social media are adorable, don't get me wrong there, but, some of the other aspects of it have been a little bit challenging for them on the reputational front.
Cool. Okay, let's move on to my topic. So TikTok just announced that they are launching TV studios with AI doing production. Um, on June 30th, they have launched what they're calling mini dramas, a feature that lets
Mhm,
brands and marketers build and publish serialized episodic fiction directly on TikTok. The episodes are running 60 to 90 seconds, designed to binge on the vertical format. The big reason is monetization, obviously, right?
yeah,
Brands publish through two in-app hubs, the Minis Center, discovering revenue from
mhm,
audience payments or embedded ads to unlock episodes, or the Drama Center, direct from brands' TikTok accounts with built-in monetization. They're claiming that there's going to be a 52% increase in incremental audience reach beyond off-platform campaigns and a 10x increase for advertisers. This is a big deal because now brands can produce AI generated characters, storylines on vertical video from a single prompt, which, again, we're going to be the AI slopification of things, right? But, I think
wild.
the big thing
Mhm,
here is that they're trying to compete with Netflix and YouTube, which obviously already do serialized content. Now TikTok wants to start competing even more with those platforms and want to get their audiences on board. So a lot of what I've seen from this is that brands were already trying to do this themselves because they've noticed that people keep coming back if they create serialized content, right? So that's like the
Mhm.
big thing now where it's like, how do we create serialized content? How do we make it easier for people to come back to continue seeing the same brands over and over again? We've seen that happen on YouTube, right? Like InStyle has like a famous, like, serialized drama that they do. And now you have, podcasts going on to like Netflix. So it's giving them more like serialized content that they can do. So the big thing that TikTok had to, figure out is how do we get people to do similar types of content for a longer amount of time. And that's where this kind of steps in. So it makes a lot of sense. And I think it's like really smart for them to do. The one thing I'm hesitant about is like, why does it have to be AI?
Yeah,
Because,
right?
because it's like, first of all, how are you going to compete with like actual content that's like being created? TV shows and all that, that have like stars and like, people that you follow, characters that you like, or, even like with reality TV, I mean, that's essentially like serialized content. So I'm surprised they didn't go that route with, TikTok, because you already have so many creators and influencers on there creating content anyway. Why would you then do AI generated content?
There are so many creators who are already doing great serialized content anyway. You could
Hmm.
partner with those people and go ahead and work with their audience
Yeah.
to reach those people too. Especially like the one of my favorite subgenres of micro narrative drama storytelling is the horror that I see. Like
Mm.
there have been some amazing horror series on TikTok and Instagram that are all like 90 seconds or less. Basically, any brand could partner with them during Halloween or around that season or summer horror movie season to work with those creators.
Mhm.
So, why are we leaning on AI for this when it's more likely to create something derivative and sloppy?
Well, and then we're also starting to hear how much audiences hate it, right? Like whenever they
Yeah.
see something that appears to them to be AI generated, they actively skip it. They then think less of that brand overall instead of liking them and wanting to come back. And that's, like, the hard part of, like, trying to go the creator route and influencer route is, like, how are you gonna continue bringing people in? And if now
Mhm.
you're gonna be known for creating AI content, why would they come back? The other thing is that AI generated content is, like, not even there yet. Like, I mean, those of us that use AI for, like, our work know that, like, you have to be very good at, like, the prompting, you have to be specific about, like, what you're trying to do. So like where are the ideas going to come from? Like you still have to go and like try to create a storyline if you're a brand. Like who's creating
Yep.
that? Are you going to try to default to what AI is helping you do? Cuz then you're just going to go and create what everybody else is trying to create. So how are you going to stand out? And that's always the thing where it's like if you're going to be creating content, you have to stand out because otherwise why would they follow you instead of all the other brands that are doing the exact same thing?
Yeah,
So
is
Jess, you create content on TikTok. Is this something that appeals to you?
definitely not the AI angle of it. I would say my biggest problem with AI generated content is the sameness issue.
Mhm.
When lots of people use the same models, the same templates, the same genre conventions, the same trend data, the outputs end up converging. The danger of a flood of brand micro dramas that all feel like lightly personalized versions of the same script are very likely to happen. And the brands that can do well will have advantages like a distinctive world, a distinctive voice, or a product with a reasonable story function, which is
Mhm.
how, like, for example, candy brands have done a great job, and
Mm.
and Uber Eats and things like that have done a
Mhm.
great job creating, say, horror content around Halloween. It is pertinent to that event,
Mhm.
but without that relevance to the story and without that distinctiveness, then the format can easily become just expensive content clutter even if the AI makes the production feel cheaper. And is that really worth your time and your reputation? Like, also, I want to know to what extent these folks are thinking about what makes someone watch episode 2? Like, if you have to think that hard to create an original story, why not create an original story? Like, they'll still have to think through what people want and what the characters want, what they'll
Yep.
lose, what the secrets are, what the joke is, and they'll have to figure out why people should care before they scroll. And that's like the serialized format can be great for rewarding curiosity, for example, but you still have to think through that whole process anyway, and for a 90-second video, are you really saving that much time by using this function?
Yeah, the other thing, as you're talking about this, I'm like, who is gonna do this? Like, whose
Yeah.
job is it gonna be to, like, create AI generated content? When,
Mhm.
like, it's not easy to come up with the story, to come up with the characters, to come up with, the plot, all of that is, like, hard work. So, is this,
Yeah.
like, you're prompting that into, like, the system, and then the system is doing it for you, in which case you're gonna be, doing the same as everybody else? Or are you gonna be creating all these, like, unique storylines, at which point, why would you then expend energy on AI generated content instead of trying to get, like, real real humans to do it that people are gonna pay attention to a lot more than AI generated content?
Okay, this actually reminds me of a thing that happened in the past. Do you know why we call soap operas?
No. But I
Soap
love that we're gonna
opera
have an etymology lesson from
We
Jess.
are, and it's pertinent. It's very pertinent to this. The term soap opera came around in the 1930s because consumer goods companies like Procter& and Gamble and Colgate sponsored serialized daytime radio dramas aimed heavily at homemakers, and their sponsorship became so closely associated with the format that soap opera became the generic term for the entire genre. So, are we going to end up with a 90-second genre of crappy AI sponsored soap operas? Like, is that what we're getting
Yeah.
again? These are not the same model, but there's a lot of historical echo here. Like the consumer brands are once again funding serialized entertainment as a way to build attention and product relevance. And the difference is that the modern platform can combine these, production and distribution and audience targeting and everything. But the recurring factor here is that the content is also probably going to be cheap and cheesy.
Yeah, but I mean, that brings up an excellent point. Why would the brands try to create their own AI generated content instead of trying to find creators that are creating serialized content that people
Mhm,
already want to go watch and then sponsoring those brands instead?
mhm,
Because it's like that way you get the best of both worlds. You get the TikTok audience that like is growing with a creator that's like creating actual content that people want to watch without
uh-huh.
having to like stoop down to cheap AI generated content that like nobody wants to watch and that people are actively turning away from. That'll make it much easier for TikTok and brands to compete against the Netflixes and YouTubes of the world. Though I mean, the fact that Netflix and Amazon have recently opened up their own ad platforms will make it easier for brands to have ads within shows that they know people like already.
Mhm.
If I'm like the decision maker of like where my marketing spend is going to go, I'd rather choose an actual
Yeah.
serialized show that has like movie stars that people are actively, paying attention to versus, trying to find somebody in the company that's interested enough in trying to create AI generated content on TikTok to like, grow that up.
Yeah, agreed. If they're gonna think through it properly, then they need to be doing what serialized content creators are already doing. They need a fandom, they need a subculture, they need a visually recognizable product or a service. They need a reason for repeat engagement. They need this natural before and after story. And at some point it just becomes, well, why don't we let someone who's already doing this do it?
Yeah, exactly. That reminds me, YouTube has recently announced that they are demonetizing AI slop. So it's interesting that TikTok is choosing the opposite tactic
Yeah.
of encouraging AI slop onto their platform. I think that is going to be a battle of like, what do people actually want to watch? Do they want to watch AI content or do they not want to watch AI content? I'll definitely be keeping an eye on whether we see any of these changes going forward. And then whether there are any brands that are, going out there and saying, "Oh yeah, we're signing up for this," and actually want to like experiment with it.
I'm sure someone will, and I'm sure it will be interesting and gimmicky for a couple times. The thing that it reminds me of in particular is so there is precedent for this. Like micro
Mhm.
dramas have been building for years in China, which
Mhm.
you alluded to, where the format took off on a number of platforms, and it's pretty popular there. But so is like live stream shopping, and that has
Mhm.
been like TikTok's tried pushing that pretty heavily in the States, and it just hasn't taken off to the same degree. It has perhaps over time and gained some legs, but it's not to the extent that it is in China. So maybe it's like a cultural difference for interest in or hunger in types of content. But
Is that AI generated content? For in
There
China?
is AI generated content among it. So it is
Oh,
not
okay.
exclusively, no. So it's not like there's plenty of precedent for serialized shorts, but
Mhm.
plenty of them in China are also not AI generated.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, because
But
I'm,
AI influencers are also a bit bigger in China as well.
oh, interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if that's kind of what they're going for, of like trying to get a bunch of men to create AI women to create serialized content. The one thing it's funny because I have talked about this before in terms of why I think like a lot of creator content on TikTok is like an MLM where it's like someone creates an idea and then everybody else just kind of copies the same idea. They barely ever change it. They just hope to get as much attention as they can before they move on to like the next idea. And so I
Mhm.
feel like that's going to get exponentially like worse with AI content because now what you can essentially do is go follow a creator that's like doing something and then create your own AI version of it and then steal away, views and monetization from them. Like what we're seeing with happen on Twitter where it's like they're actively trying to like demonetize people that copy other people's content because they want the original creators to be the ones that get the monetization.
Mhm.
And I think Reels is doing something similar. I think they just announced that this last week where it's like they're actively going to start trying to like demonetize the creators that are just copying what other creators are doing and not remixing it, not putting their own like spin to it. So again, it is interesting that like TikTok is doing the opposite thing, because
Yeah.
it's like why would you spurn the creators that are creating the original content and having them go to, Reels, Reels and TikTok are obviously like, in a battle for like that video audience. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this kind of plays out.
Yeah, I mean, the positive take here, I think, is that there is room for original, interesting micro dramas on these
Mhm.
platforms because people spend so much time
Yeah,
there and they're hungry for entertainment and character and good writing and storytelling. But I the other take is I don't know if you can achieve that using AI tools, and I don't think it's good for your reputation or your bottom line to do so.
agree.
Mhm.
Yeah, my lesson for this is that when production costs hit zero, the differentiator becomes the point of view. The brands that want to like participate this, but that also want to win, you're still gonna have to create those storylines that are interesting to
Mhm.
people. Because otherwise, if you are defaulting to AI, much like we see it with AI writing. That just kind of, falls to the mean, and you lose all differentiation because you're just doing the same thing that everybody else is doing. So if you
Mhm.
really want to stand out, you really have to try to be as original as possible. And at that point, if you're putting that much effort into it, why not put it in, towards something original as opposed to trying to copy what everybody else is doing? So that's one thing there. And then for creators that are facing what they have to learn to become an excellent AI prompter in order to create the TikToks that will actually garner enough attention, it's
Mhm.
probably better for you to create your own content so that you are more original and then can possibly start going after brands that are looking to sponsor more serialized content over a longer period of time than like one-off videos, and like showing that like you can do that by yourself instead of needing to default to like an AI, because at that point it's like, well, why should we go after you if we can just AI prompt it or whatever.
Yeah. A good example that we've seen of a brand kind of investing in this is an example from Estee Lauder. They created a short drama romance, basically,
Mm,
and it leaned into an existing fandom, and people were already emotionally invested, and the lipstick worked in that context. But for every other brand who's doing this, they're really going to have to decide whether they want to be production houses. It's a very different kind of creative commitment than existing TikTok formats. It requires a brand to think in episodes. It requires characters and continuity and payoff, and it requires a product that can do something inside the story. And the most interesting examples aren't going to be the ones where a product flashes up a lot. They're going to be the ones where the product has a narrative job,
Mhm.
like the Estee Lauder one, for example. I'm a little worried about this being like another every brand needs a TikTok kind of thing. Like every brand needs a podcast, every brand needs a Discord, every
Mhm,
brand
mhm.
needs a serialized micro drama.
Right.
But the fact is that brands have, worlds people genuinely want to spend time in, but only some of them, and most of them don't. So I don't think this format is going to become table stakes for everyone. I think it could be an effective and interesting tool for the kinds of brands that are already telling interesting fictional stories,
Mhm.
potentially. And I do not love that it's launching. TikTok is launching these at exactly the moment that AI is making it so much cheaper to generate scripts and characters and dialogue and voiceover and music and videos. And I don't think that's going to pay off for a lot of the brands who take advantage of that full suite.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's too good to be true,
Yeah.
um,
Episodic content is harder than you think. You have to
yeah.
be able to think through what happens next. What does this actually mean? What is the symbolic resonance of what's happening on screen? Did things end up did all of the plot lines end up tied up? And
Mhm.
and AI storytelling isn't as awesome as that at
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. One of the examples recently that I've mentioned here is the Subway podcast, right? It doesn't really have anything to do with Subway, It's just that's who like has made it and sponsored it. Rachel Carton has mentioned TikTok creators that are adjacent to the brand accounts but aren't the brand account, but that's who's getting like all the like attention. It's like you have the like not Spirit Airlines, you have like the one I think it like goes to Wendy's and they create
Mhm.
content there. And it's all these things where it's like you're doing the product placement through like it being in the background but not
Mhm.
it being the product itself. And I think that that's like, we're so used to like product placement in like movies and now like TV shows, right? Like Netflix has started doing it in like their they did it with the Kate Hudson show Running Point. I think
Mhm.
they're going to be doing it, in the future going forward. There's so many other options that are like coming to the forefront in order to be featured in shows or, TV movies in some way. That's like having to create your own content now seems more onerous. So I am
Yeah.
surprised that they're like actually going this way, as opposed to trying to encourage the actual creators, the actual influencers that know how to create this type of like content instead of trying to get brands to create random content that like nobody's gonna watch.
The best brand short films in the past have always featured existing strong directors and writers
Hmm.
and storytelling teams and a lot of
Right.
editorial judgment and people who the audience cares about, celebrities, or in this case, it could be creators. Hopefully, that is what we end up with more of and a little less generic slop.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So as a
Mhm.
brand, like, if you're thinking about going this way, like think about whether that's actually a good use of your budget and time because
Mhm.
you are going to have to learn how to do this in a specific way that like works for TikTok, and whether that wouldn't be better used somewhere else.
I have no doubt that we're going to see some agencies pitching this kind of thing in the near future. So I'm interested to see what
Horrible.
happens.
We'll see. Awesome.
So earlier this week, the New York Times framed Threads as a Twitter killer. It's saying that basically Threads is performing so well right now as a text-based app that it's replacing it's filled the gap that Twitter used to occupy in terms of audience, and it certainly does. Like Meta announced that it has 500 million monthly active users as of June 16th, and it tied the growth to communities like book threads and basketball threads and parenting threads and music threads, which actually is kind of interesting because it is actually a little bit more like Reddit in the way it
Mm,
builds communities around topics compared to Twitter, which continue to rely on kind of breaking news. Like Twitter
mhm.
back in the day was where you could follow news around major weather events and things like that. And Threads has not quite done that. It's more community-based entertainment, and it reacts to things in a similar way. But it is the biggest text-based sort of micro-blogging platform. It is interesting too that like Threads had one of the biggest launch ramps that any social app has ever created because it didn't have to build its social presence from
Mhm.
scratch. Users could arrive with their LinkedIn or sorry, users could arrive with their Instagram linked identity or their Facebook account and already have like a familiar profile and a path to familiar people, which kind of solved the cold start problem that, say, Blue Sky and other platforms have not quite accomplished. So I would argue that Blue Sky behaves more like Twitter used to, and a lot of journalists have flocked from Twitter over to Blue Sky, and the audience there kind of reflects that ethos. The Reddit comparison is pretty useful. Threads has become this less real-time ticker and more of this interest-based community platform. People gather around entertainment and sports and fandoms and hobbies and like K-pop and the WNBA and books and dating, and I said parenting already. I would also propose that it has a little bit of Pinterest to it, not because
Hmm.
of the image format, but because the content categories that seem to work on Threads overlap strongly with Pinterest's world, like books and beauty and food and home and fashion and travel and hobbies and wellness, and even quality video and photos in some cases. So, Pinterest organizes those categories around ideas and inspiration and intent, and then Threads organizes many of the same categories around conversation and identity. In my experience, it has been kind of a Reddit Pinterest hybrid, but with the microblogging of Twitter.
Yeah, that's interesting because it was always like meant to be this whole like Twitter killer, right?
Mhm,
But it never seemed to want to own the space entirely, right? Like Twitter was always more of like the breaking news app, right? It's like you went there, you knew that journalists were going to be telling you everything that was happening. And Threads never really seemed that. Like it seemed like as if you could come back and just like dally and like post every so often. Whereas with Twitter, it seemed like if you wanted to be part of the conversation, you had to be in the conversation as it was happening. So it really hasn't fit that role, but it's
mhm,
also never wanted to, right? I mean, Facebook and Instagram have previously both faced, controversy over their political, involvement.
mhm.
um, for previous elections, particularly here in America. So I think it was intentional that they didn't want to become like the breaking news source. But I think that has kind of hindered their ability to be more in the conversation the way that Twitter
Mhm.
still, I feel like Twitter still remains that, even though, yeah, not everybody has come back. Even though it does seem as if it's having a bit of a resurgence. But even back at like peak days, I feel like it didn't have this many, like users, right? You had its smaller communities of like who were, speaking there, like, when we had marketing Twitter and like, the folks that were there, like, talking. Um, but I'm sure that Threads has an easier time getting brands to come, create ads there because like Twitter very famously doesn't do that very well, A. And then B, because of its political nature, a lot of brands
It's not
aren't.
always a brand safe environment,
Right.
right?
Yeah, it's not a place that like brands are
Mhm.
like secure in wanting to put their money there. So that's another thing. So it does feel as if it's like they've kind of diverged a little bit and it's, Threads has just kind of become its own thing, which is
Yeah.
interesting. And kind of cool, good for them.
It strikes me that it was trying to solve for something that Twitter did try to do. Like
Mhm,
when we were on Twitter and in its heyday, we were part of quote unquote marketing Twitter, right?
mhm,
Which was a community of people who communicated primarily on Twitter about marketing stuff.
mhm,
And like that's where I ran Adweek chat and things like that.
mhm,
That's where we ended up meeting and enjoying some of the friends that we still talk to in the marketing space. But the platform did not make it super easy to find all of that in one place. And that seems
mhm,
to be what Threads was trying to solve for, right? What by creating these communities that are branded by posting to book threads, I can find people who I know are interested in book news and updates about books and discourse about books and things like that. And this is kind of the point of the New York Times story is that by doing so, it has become more Reddit like because those operate sort of like subreddits, which I don't know if I can agree completely with that because of the way people interact with Reddit versus the way they interact with Threads, but I do think it is definitely its own thing, and it doesn't strike me as a replacement for Twitter now.
You know what this is making me think is that,
Hmm.
is it going to be a replacement for Facebook? I would be curious how Facebook sees its Facebook audience versus its Thread audience, and whether Threads will eventually eat Facebook, because people just aren't participating on Facebook the way that they used to, or the way that Facebook would like. Um,
Mhm.
and if Threads becomes like the place that people do that, because I feel like Instagram is becoming more of the place of like you're sharing photos, and you're trying to like be more with like the people that you actually follow, whereas like Threads is like the more of the I know the people, but I'm more inclined to follow people that I don't know. And so
Mhm.
where's the space for Facebook in that, because it doesn't fill any of those things anymore. And the more that they're encouraging people to do text-based posting, that would alternately be put on Facebook instead, makes me think that like Threads might eventually eat Facebook, especially because it's not actually doing what Twitter does anymore, and it is becoming more of a like community space, and like finding people to follow. And if they're having talks about that internally at like
Mm.
Meta as they're figuring out what each of the platforms are meant to do.
Well, I think the short answer to that is, can Meta create a gigantic Franken platform with lots of different features and that tries to do lots of different things? Absolutely. It's done that 3 times.
Yeah,
But right now, Threads is still like it's one of the ones that hasn't introduced quite as many features upon features upon features. And it does have, I mean, this is totally anecdotal, but it strikes me that Instagram and Threads have slightly less cultural controversy attached to them than Facebook, which is
oh
often
totally.
synonymous with some of the PR problems they've had in the past.
Sure, I mean they're making a whole movie about it
Yeah,
again,
they're selling books about it and all of the above,
Exactly.
you and I know very well that Meta is the responsible party for all of those platforms, but
Mhm.
does your grandma know that when she's choosing her social media platforms?
Well, totally, but grandma
Mhm.
is eventually gonna die. And basically, I guess my question is, when young people are signing up for social accounts, are they still signing up for Facebook? Or are they now optimizing for Instagram and Threads instead, because they still see the value in those? Um, And is Facebook gonna continue being, like, a place that, they go? Because, I
Yeah.
mean, the more that we hear is it sounds as if young people are completely skipping over Facebook, because it's like, it's not my audience, it's not where I care to see people, it's not, I never post, and I feel like it's, if they're starting to die down on, like, who them actually using, Facebook, and then it's all just, the older people that eventually are, gonna pass away, because I mean that's life,
Mhm.
then like, are we gonna see more growth in Threads, because it is offering something different. And Instagram I feel like will continue growing, because that's mostly still like the number one image based social network, right? None of them have even gotten close to that. Instagram still seems to be, innovating enough to create, new they've done reels, they're doing, I'm sure they'll do some serialized content soon, right? Because that's an obvious thing with them copying, Snapchat and TikTok and what they're doing.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of growth there for, Instagram to continue. There does seem like a lot of more growth that could be happening on Threads. I just wonder, yeah, where the future is for Facebook. Like, what else could they be doing? That's
Yeah.
not just like I'm reposting what I'm posting on Instagram onto Facebook.
Yeah.
Um,
And for me,
but
it's
yeah.
like the place to keep up with my elderly relatives. That's like end of thought.
Yeah, 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 exactly. I mean, yeah, that's pretty much for me too. I don't like actively use it anymore for
Mhm.
anything. But after reading this, I'm like, maybe I should be paying more attention to Threads, because, like, I joined when it first came out, but I haven't really like kept up with it. And I'm
Mhm.
like, hearing you talk about, I'm like, oh, maybe I do just go and start trying to like post more about the stuff that I am posting on Twitter.
It is,
Um,
generally speaking, a relatively brand safe platform, so I mean, it's certainly something to watch.
yeah, 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 for sure.
Mhm.
Cool.
So, I would say, is Threads really killing Twitter? And it
Yeah.
it may be killing one version of Twitter. It's probably not replacing every function Twitter served. It's certainly not serving the function that Twitter does of being sort of the controversial hotbed that it continues to be. And Twitter used to do a bunch of jobs at once. It was breaking news, media chatter, political combat, sports reactions, academic exchange. It was comedy, it was customer service, it was fandom, it was brand voice, and now those jobs are split across platforms, right? Like X still has its news and politics, Blue Sky has a lot of the old media and academic culture, Threads has scale and interest communities, Reddit has expertise and search value, especially with AI search, and then LinkedIn has, of course, its like professional identity. So the Twitter killer label, I think, is probably too simple. I mean, that was the point of that story. But I think boiling it down to just being like Reddit is a little reductive.
Hmm.
Um, it's Threads is has a little Reddit, has a little Pinterest, has a little Instagram, and it has room for aspiration and hobbies and beauty and books and food and for brands to participate in those things too, as long as they do it in a community safe way. And then it also has it has some creator appeal and visual culture audience as well. So people who don't necessarily like the image and video forward format of Instagram have a place to play a little bit more as creators. But I think for brands, posting like it is X with different lighting isn't quite the same. It's not it's a different project, if it's a different product and it's a different audience. So once again, we have to specialize our content to the platform. My read is that Threads is a legit platform now. I mean, that's not a
Yep.
controversial statement, but the Twitter killer framing kind of hides and the Reddit comparison kind of hides the more interesting story, and that it's drifted away from the anger and news rhythm of X and toward communities that look more like different interest categories. And for brands, I think the opportunity is less about hot takes and more about recurring participation and treating it like a content creation platform more likely, because they have an opportunity to connect with fandom and taste and routine and in a way that users perceive to be safe.
Yeah. So lesson for me is that Threads and X are not the same product anymore. So now you do have to create content for each channel. You have to figure out like what's working for Twitter and what's working for Threads for you, right? And then also start thinking about like, is it worth you doing both channels, right? Like maybe you don't have to do Twitter if that's not where your audience is. Maybe it's enough now to move over to Threads that has more of those like interest categories and like audiences that you can just, go direct to. Make sure that the channel you're actually using is good for what you're doing it for. This also means like, if you're using Twitter and like Threads as like interchangeable like platforms for you to post the same thing, it's not going to be doing as well, right? Like now you have to create Twitter and like thread specific content. I think one of the examples that became very obvious for this recently was the Artemis 2 launch, because it came out that like NASA had one person doing like threads. So it's like she owned that entire channel and like grew it to like what it was. I mean, I think Rachel Carton wrote about it, just showing that like, Threads is like a legit platform now. So, something for brands to think about there is like whether you're using it to the utmost that it could be. The other thing here too is that, the organic reach dynamics are genuinely different. Threads surfaces content to non-followers and X favors established accounts. So you could presumably build up a Threads account, from zero pretty quickly if you're posting regularly and like content that is specific to that audience there.
The format is really distinct too.
Mhm.
It lives up to its name.
Mhm.
Brands and creators who and writers, etc., who use the threaded narrative format do a lot better on Threads than they often did in the past on Twitter. I know there are plenty of exceptions to that, but after various changes at Twitter, sometimes like a long thread became a little bit unwieldy and
Mhm.
Threads handles it a lot better. So playing into that stylistic choice is a good way to start using the platform in the way that it was intended.
Takeaways from this whole thing is just figuring out where you want your brand to land
Mhm.
when it comes to jumping in on events like with the World Cup and Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce getting married. Is that an actual opportunity for you, or are you just trying to get attention for a thing that doesn't make sense for your brand? Similar here with the conversation between Twitter and Threads, like really considering whether it's an actual opportunity for you and a channel that's gonna be good for you. Similar again to like the TikTok, serialized content. Like, is that an actual thing that you should be spending time on and learning? There seems to be more and more avenues and channels for you to like jump on in terms of marketing. You really have to choose the ones that like make sense for you, because otherwise you could just be running around with like a chicken with your head cut off because you want to participate in everything and not really figuring out what the voice of your brand is and what makes sense. And I think that trying to like participate in everything removes you from like your audience, because they're like, should you really be involved in this conversation, or should you just kind of like ignore it and speak to your audience? So really figuring out what your audience expects from you, but then like where you want to take your audience with you. I think it's like brands should be thinking about their audiences as uh people that you take along with you on their journey and invite them into how your brand reacts to like cultural moments, yes, but then the channels that you're on as well. And trying to do everything will waste a lot of money and time, but then also end up losing you the audience that like really believes you don't need to be doing that in the first place.
Excellent. I love it. And I would just add that adding value, I mean, this is not a new take by
Yeah.
any means, but I do think it's escalating. Like adding
Mm.
value and not just noise continues to be a major challenge for brands across social platforms that can be in these like serialized video or film drama formats. It's filling a gap that Hollywood is having trouble filling, and it's filling a gap that people are seeking in social media spaces. But to create quality content and to do so meaningfully in a way that does not damage your brand is it's hard. It's hard. You have to put the work and creativity and effort into it. As brands continue to have more money than say existing creative studios, then brands can kind of step into those open spaces, but they're not going to help themselves if they don't put the same kind of creative effort and work into it that entertainment studios have in the past.
Yeah, another one, just piggybacking off of that, is
Mhm.
this whole idea of like discernment and like taste, where it's
Mhm.
like you have to be able to discern whether like you should participate in these things. Okay, tying it back to the Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce wedding, the fact that you have so much money, she's a billionaire, he's a millionaire, whatever, 100 millionaire, shows that it's better for you to decide the things that like make sense for you and like the narrative that you're trying to push, instead of trying to have everything, right? You can try to do too much, invite a thousand people to your wedding and have it in like this space to try to fit into that, instead of and have that go astray because you're trying to do too much, instead of sticking to like your values and the story that you're trying to put out and make it fit with those things, because it makes sense for that narrative that you are putting out, and your audience learns to expect things from you. And when you kind of you know go off on a tangent, people question what they feel your brand says about them. If that,
Absolutely.
yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jess, for joining me. Where can people find you?
This has been really fun. You can find me at Useless Etymology on Instagram. I'm at Jess Zafaris on TikTok, and I have a podcast called Words Unraveled on YouTube.
Awesome. And then you can follow me at Sonia Bushes everywhere, and follow the podcast at Mean Team Pod on YouTube, Spotify, and TikTok. Thank you. See you next week.